I discovered my space heater was missing on the coldest Tuesday morning Phoenix. Arizona had seen in over a decade, when the temperature inside my apartment dropped to what felt like 50 degrees, and my breath came out in visible puffs. My name is Xavier Forsyth, and I had been living in the Sunrise Valley Estates townhome community for about 8 months. The place was nice enough. Modern construction with stucco exteriors painted in various shades of beige and tan that blended into the desert landscape. The HOA fees were steep at $300 a month, but the amenities seemed worth it at first. A pool, a fitness center, landscaped common areas, and supposedly attentive management. What I didn't know when I signed my lease was that the HOA president, a woman named Patricia Hendricks, would become the bane of my existence. Patricia was exactly what you would picture when someone says, HOA Karen. Mid-40s, shoulder-length blonde hair that was always blow-dried to perfection, wearing athleisure outfits that cost more than my monthly car payment, and perpetually clutching either a clipboard or her phone as she prowled the neighborhood looking for violations. She drove a white Mercedes SUV with a custom license plate that read Rolls R Rolls, which should have been my first warning sign. I worked from home as a software developer, which meant I spent most of my days inside my townhome. When winter hit the desert, even though Phoenix doesn't get freezing cold by most standards, the townhomes were poorly insulated. The central heating system was old and barely functional, so I had purchased a high-quality ceramic space heater from a home improvement store for about $80. It had been a lifesaver, keeping my home office warm enough that my fingers didn't go numb while typing. That Tuesday morning, I had gotten up early to grab coffee and breakfast before a 9 o'clock video call with a client. I walked into my home office, which was the second bedroom of my 2-bedroom townhome, and immediately noticed something was off. The familiar warmth that usually greeted me was absent. The space where my heater normally sat, tucked next to my desk, was empty. Just empty carpet and a slight indentation where the heater had rested. My first thought was that I had moved it and forgotten. I checked the living room, the bedroom, even the bathroom. Nothing. Then I noticed that my sliding glass door leading to the small patio was unlocked. I always locked that door. Always. My stomach dropped as I realized someone had been in my home. I immediately called the non-emergency police line. An officer arrived about 40 minutes later, a tired-looking man in his 30s named Officer Ramirez who took notes as I explained the situation. He examined the sliding door and pointed out some scratch marks around the lock mechanism that I hadn't noticed. "Looks like someone jimmied it open," he said, taking photos. "These patio doors aren't the most secure. You say nothing else is missing." I had checked thoroughly while waiting for him. My laptop, my TV, my gaming console, all the valuable electronics were still there. Just the space heater was gone. "It's weird," Officer Ramirez admitted. "Usually, thieves go for electronics, jewelry, cash. A space heater is an odd thing to steal on its own." He filed a report and gave me a case number, suggesting I invest in a security bar for the sliding door and maybe a camera. After he left, I sat in my cold office feeling violated and confused. Who breaks into someone's home just to steal a space heater? The video call with my client went poorly because I was distracted and shivering. Afterward, I drove to the hardware store and bought a new space heater, a security bar for the patio door, and a wireless security camera that I could monitor from my phone. I spent the afternoon installing everything and trying to shake the creepy feeling that someone had been in my private space. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about the break-in. Something about it nagged at me. The patio doors faced the common area walking paths, meaning whoever broke in took a significant risk of being seen. And why just the heater? I started paying more attention to my surroundings, to my neighbors, to anyone who seemed suspicious. That's when I started noticing Patricia Hendricks showing up more often. She had always been a constant presence in the neighborhood, doing her rounds, documenting violations, leaving passive-aggressive notes on people's doors about trash cans being visible from the street or holiday decorations being up past the designated date. But now I saw her walking past my townhome multiple times a day, always glancing toward my unit, sometimes pausing as if she was looking for something specific. On Friday, 4 days after the theft, I found a notice stuck to my front door. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, with Patricia's name at the bottom as president. The notice stated that I was in violation of community guidelines for excessive energy consumption contributing to strain on community resources, and that I needed to reduce my electrical usage immediately or face fines. I stood there reading it 3 times, completely baffled. We each had our own electric meters. I paid my own utility bills. How was my energy consumption any of the HOA's business? And more importantly, how would they even know about my usage? I decided to call the HOA management company directly. I reached a woman named Susan who sounded apologetic but confused when I read her the notice. "Mr. Forsyth, that's not actually something the HOA can enforce," she said. "Each unit has independent utilities. The association has no authority over individual energy usage unless it's related to common areas. I'm not sure why Mrs. Hendricks would send that notice." "Can you tell her to back off?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "I can certainly bring it up at the next board meeting," Susan said, though she didn't sound confident. "Mrs. Hendricks is quite assertive in her role." That was an understatement. Over the weekend, I got 2 more notices. One claimed I had been leaving my trash bins visible from the street, which was absurd because I always rolled them back to the designated storage area within an hour of trash pickup. Another claimed my patio furniture was not in approved colors according to the design standards, even though I had purchased everything specifically to match the approved palette listed in the community guidelines I had received when I moved in. Patricia was harassing me. That much was clear. But I couldn't figure out why. I had never had a confrontation with her. I paid my HOA fees on time. I kept my place neat and followed the rules. Well, most of them. There were so many rules in the Sunrise Valley Estates Handbook that I don't think anyone could follow all of them simultaneously. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after my space heater was stolen, I discovered something interesting. I had been checking my new security camera religiously, watching footage of my patio and the walkway beyond it. Most of it was boring. Just occasional neighbors walking dogs or joggers passing by. But Monday morning's footage from the previous evening showed something that made my blood pressure spike. There, clear as day at around 9:30 at night, was Patricia Hendricks walking slowly past my patio. She stopped, looked around, and then approached my sliding glass door. She tried the handle. The security bar held firm, and after a few seconds of pulling, she gave up and walked away quickly. I rewound the footage and watched it 5 more times. Patricia had just tried to break into my home. Or at least, she had tried to open my door without permission. My hands were shaking as I saved the footage to 3 different locations: cloud storage, my computer, and a USB drive. But I still didn't have proof she had stolen my heater. The camera had only been installed after the theft. I needed more evidence before I could accuse the HOA president of breaking and entering and theft. If I made accusations without solid proof, she could make my life even more miserable or even sue me for defamation. I decided to do some investigating. That afternoon, I took a walk around the neighborhood, something I didn't do often enough. I wanted to see if I could spot my space heater anywhere, maybe through a window or on someone's patio. It was a long shot, but I didn't know what else to do. Sunrise Valley Estates had about 60 townhomes arranged in clusters around a central clubhouse and pool area. Most of the units looked identical from the outside. I walked slowly, trying not to look too suspicious, casually glancing at windows and patios as I passed. I was about to give up when I reached the far end of the complex, where the slightly larger corner units were located. These were the premium townhomes with extra square footage and better views. Patricia Hendricks lived in one of them, I knew, because I had seen her Mercedes parked in front of it countless times. As I walked past, trying to look casual, I glanced at her ground floor windows, and there it was, my space heater. Sitting right there in what looked like her home office, visible through a window that had the blinds partially open. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring. It was definitely mine. Same brand, same model, and it had a distinctive scratch on the left side where I had accidentally scraped it against a doorframe when I first brought it home. My heart was pounding. I wanted to march up to her door and demand my property back, but I forced myself to keep walking. I needed to be smart about this. Patricia was the HOA president. She clearly had a vindictive streak. If I confronted her directly, she would just deny it, and then I would be in an even worse position. When I got home, I started documenting everything. I took photos of her window showing the heater, though they were from a distance and not incredibly clear. I wrote down dates and times of all her harassment. I compiled all the bogus violation notices. I had the security footage of her trying my door. I was building a case, but I still felt like I needed something more concrete. That evening, I called my friend Marcus, who was a paralegal at a law firm in Scottsdale. I explained the whole situation, and he listened without interrupting. "Okay, so you've got a few things here," Marcus said when I finished. "Breaking and entering, theft, possibly harassment. The problem is proving it. The footage of her trying your door is good, but she could claim she was checking if it was secure or some nonsense. The heater in her window is suggestive but not definitive proof it's yours unless you have the serial number recorded somewhere." I groaned. I didn't have the serial number. Who records the serial number of their space heater? "But here's an idea," Marcus continued. "You said you got a notice about excessive energy consumption." "Yeah, which doesn't even make sense." "Right, but think about it. Why would she care about your energy consumption? Unless—" He paused. "Unless something changed that made her aware of it. Do you guys share any utilities?" I thought about it. The townhomes have individual meters for electric and gas. Water is included in the HOA fees because it's billed collectively for the whole complex. Interesting. When did you get that notice? "Last Friday, 4 days after my heater was stolen." "And when did you buy your new heater?" "The same day it was stolen, Tuesday." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "So Tuesday, your original heater was stolen. You bought a new one the same day. Then Friday, you got a notice about excessive energy consumption. What if she stole your heater, started using it herself, and then noticed her own electric bill or usage had gone up?" My mind was racing. "But why would she send me a notice about it?" "Because she's not that bright," Marcus suggested. "Or because she's trying to justify something. Think about it. If she's questioned about why her electrical usage suddenly spiked, she could point to her crusade against your excessive consumption as evidence that she's concerned about energy usage in general. It's misdirection." It was convoluted, but it made a weird kind of sense. Patricia wasn't exactly known for her logical thinking. "So what do?" I asked. "Get her electrical usage records," Marcus said. "They're usually available through the utility company if you can prove you have a legitimate reason to see them. Or, easier option, just wait for the next billing cycle and see if she complains about her bill. In the meantime, document everything, and maybe file a police report about her trying your door." I thanked Marcus and hung up, feeling slightly more in control of the situation, but I still felt angry. This woman had broken into my home, stolen my property, and was now using it while simultaneously harassing me with fake violations. The next morning, I went back to the police station and spoke with Officer Ramirez again. I showed him the security footage of Patricia trying my door. He watched it carefully, his expression neutral. "That's definitely suspicious," he said. "But she didn't actually gain entry, and without clear evidence that she's the one who took your heater before you installed the camera, it's hard to pursue charges." "What if I can prove the heater in her house is mine?" I asked. "Then we'd have grounds for theft charges," he said. "Do you have the serial number or any unique identifying marks?" I told him about the scratch, and he nodded. "If you can get a clear photo of that scratch on the heater in her possession, that would help. But you can't trespass or break any laws to get that evidence." I left the police station feeling frustrated but determined. I spent the rest of the day working or trying to work. My concentration was shot. Every time I looked at my new space heater humming away next to my desk, I thought about Patricia using my original one in her house. That evening, I decided to take another walk past her townhome. I brought my phone and made sure the camera was ready. As I approached, I tried to look casual, like I was just out for an evening stroll. The sun was setting, and lights were coming on inside the units. Patricia's window still had the blinds partially open, and I could see the space heater clearly from the sidewalk. I pretended to stop and tie my shoe, which gave me an excuse to pause and take several photos with my phone zoomed in as far as it would go. The quality wasn't great in the fading light, but I could definitely see the heater, and in one shot, I managed to capture the angle where the scratch was visible. I was just standing up when Patricia's front door opened. She stepped out, wearing yoga pants and an expensive-looking jacket, and froze when she saw me. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice sharp and suspicious. "Just out for a walk," I said, trying to sound casual. "Nice evening." Her eyes narrowed. "You live in Building C, don't you, Xavier Forsyth?" The fact that she knew my name and building shouldn't have surprised me, but it still sent a chill down my spine. "That's right. I've sent you several violation notices," she said, stepping closer. "You haven't responded to any of them." "That's because they're all ridiculous," I said, my frustration finally bubbling over. "You can't fine me for my electrical usage. I checked with the management company." Something flickered across her face. Anger, fear. "The HOA board has the right to enforce community standards, including resource consumption that affects property values." "That's not a thing," I said. "You made it up." "I don't appreciate your tone," Patricia said, her voice rising. "As HOA president, I have a responsibility to all residents of Sunrise Valley Estates. If you continue to be uncooperative, I'll have no choice but to pursue formal sanctions." "Sanctions for what?" I demanded. "I haven't violated any real rules. You're harassing me." Her face flushed red. "Harassment? You're the one lurking outside my home taking pictures." I hadn't realized she'd seen me with my phone. "I'm on a public sidewalk," I said, though my heart was racing. "We'll see what the board has to say about this," she snapped. "You can expect another notice and a fine." She turned and stormed back into her house, slamming the door hard enough that I heard it echo across the common area. I stood there for a moment, adrenaline pumping, then quickly walked back to my own unit. That had gone poorly, but at least I had the photos. Back home, I uploaded the pictures to my computer and enhanced them as much as I could. The scratch was visible in one of the shots, though not as clearly as I would have liked. I sent everything to Marcus, asking for his opinion. He called me back 20 minutes later. "It's not bad," he said. But a defense attorney could argue it's not conclusive. Lots of heaters probably have scratches. You need something more definitive. Like what? Like catching her in possession of it directly, or getting testimony from someone else. Does she have any enemies in the HOA? Anyone who might be willing to talk about her behavior. I thought about it. I don't really know my neighbors that well. I mostly keep to myself. Might be time to change that, Marcus suggested. HOA drama always involves other people who have been screwed over. Find them. They might have useful information. The next day was Wednesday. I woke up to find yet another notice on my door, this one claiming I had violated quiet hours by creating disturbances the previous evening. The time listed was exactly when I had been confronting Patricia outside her house. She was retaliating, and she wasn't even being subtle about it. I decided to take Marcus's advice and start talking to my neighbors. I began with the townhome directly next to mine, which was occupied by a young couple I had seen a few times, but never really spoken to. I knocked on their door that evening, and a woman about my age answered, looking curious. "Hi," I said. "I'm Xavier. I live next door. I know we haven't really met properly, and I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to ask if you've had any issues with the HOA president, Patricia Hendricks." The woman's expression changed immediately, becoming guarded. "Why do you ask?" I gave her a brief summary of my situation, the stolen heater, the bogus violations, the harassment. She listened, and I could see recognition in her eyes. "Come in," she said finally. "I'm Emma, and yeah, we've had problems with her too." Inside, I met her husband, Daniel, and over the next hour they told me their own Patricia horror story. 6 months ago, they had installed solar panels on their roof to save money on electricity. Patricia had hit them with violation after violation, claiming the panels were an unapproved modification that affected the aesthetics of the community. She had tried to fine them thousands of dollars and even threatened legal action. "We had to hire a lawyer," Emma said, looking exhausted at the memory. "It cost us $5,000 in legal fees. Eventually, we proved that Arizona state law protects the right to install solar panels, and the HOA couldn't override that. But she made our lives hell for months." "She's on a power trip," Daniel added. "She thinks being HOA president makes her some kind of dictator. We've talked to other residents. Everyone has stories." This was exactly what I needed to hear. "Would you be willing to document your experience? Maybe write a statement?" They exchanged glances. "If it would help take her down, absolutely," Emma said. Over the next few days, I went door to door talking to neighbors. I had always been somewhat introverted, preferring to keep to myself, but this situation had forced me out of my comfort zone. And what I discovered was shocking. Patricia had been terrorizing the neighborhood for over 2 years. She had fined people for having the wrong color doormats, for parking their cars facing the wrong direction, for having guests stay too long. She had tried to ban one family's emotional support dog, claiming it was a violation of the no aggressive breeds policy, even though it was a golden retriever. She had prevented another resident from painting their interior walls because she claimed all modifications required HOA approval, even inside the units. Most people had just paid the fines or complied with her demands because fighting back seemed too exhausting and expensive. But the resentment was deep and widespread. I collected statements from 8 different households, all documenting Patricia's abuse of power. I also learned something else interesting. A man named George Martinez, who lived 3 buildings over, worked for Arizona Public Service, the electric company. I knocked on his door on Saturday morning, and he invited me in for coffee. "Everyone's been talking about how you're standing up to Patricia," George said. "It's about time someone did." I explained the situation with my space heater and my theory about her energy usage. George listened thoughtfully. "Okay, so here's the thing," he said. "I can't access individual account information because of privacy policies. I could lose my job. But I can tell you that the billing system automatically flags unusual spikes in usage and sends notices to account holders." "What kind of spikes would trigger a notice?" "Usually anything more than 30 or 40% over the previous month's average," George said. "A space heater running constantly could definitely do that, especially if someone wasn't using one before." "So if someone suddenly started using a space heater, they'd probably get a notice from the power company?" "Most likely, yeah. The notice would show up online in their account portal and usually comes by email too." I felt a surge of excitement. "Is there any way to verify if someone received one of those notices?" George shook his head. "Not without accessing their account, which I can't do, but—" He paused, thinking. "If you had some reason to be at an HOA board meeting and someone mentioned billing concerns, that could come up naturally." "There's a board meeting?" I asked. "Last Thursday of every month," George said. "They're technically open to all residents, though most people don't go. But you have the right to attend and raise concerns during the open comment period." This was it. This was my opportunity. The next board meeting was 5 days away. I spent that time preparing. I organized all my documentation: the police report about the break-in, the security footage of Patricia trying my door, the photos of my heater in her window, all the bogus violation notices she had sent me, and the statements from neighbors about her abuse of power. Marcus helped me prepare a formal complaint. "The goal is to present this in a way that makes the other board members turn on her," he explained. "If they think she's exposing the HOA to legal liability, they'll throw her under the bus to protect themselves." The board meeting was held in the clubhouse on Thursday evening at 7. I arrived 15 minutes early with a folder full of documents and a USB drive with all the digital evidence. The clubhouse was a single-story building with a large community room that had about 40 chairs set up facing a long table where the board would sit. Only about 12 residents showed up, which I learned was typical. Most people couldn't be bothered with HOA meetings. The board consisted of 5 people: Patricia as president, a vice president named Ronald, a treasurer named Beth, and 2 general members whose names I didn't catch during introductions. Patricia's face when she saw me walk in was priceless. Her expression went from surprise to angry to carefully neutral in about 3 seconds. She whispered something to Ronald, who glanced at me and frowned. The meeting started with standard business: approval of last month's minutes, financial reports, discussion of landscaping contracts. It was incredibly boring, and I could see why most residents skipped these meetings. But I sat patiently, waiting for the open comment period. Finally, after 45 minutes of tedious procedural discussion, Patricia said, "We'll now open the floor for resident comments. Please keep remarks brief and relevant to HOA business." I stood up immediately and walked to the front of the room. Patricia's jaw tightened. "State your name and unit number for the record," she said stiffly. "Xavier Forsyth, Building C, Unit 14, I said clearly. "I'm here to file a formal complaint against Patricia Hendricks for harassment, abuse of power, and theft." The room went completely silent. Every board member was staring at me. A few residents pulled out their phones, probably hoping for drama. That's a serious accusation, Ronald said slowly. Do you have evidence? Yes, I said, opening my folder. Substantial evidence. I walked them through everything chronologically, the break-in and theft of my space heater on December 15th. The police report filed that day. The bizarre violation notice about excessive energy consumption that arrived December 19th, which the management company confirmed was not a valid HOA concern. The additional bogus violation notices about trash cans and patio furniture, all easily disproven. The security camera footage from December 21st showing Patricia attempting to open my sliding glass door without permission. I passed around printouts of everything. The board members examined them, their expressions ranging from shocked to uncomfortable. Patricia's face was bright red. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "I was checking to ensure his door was secure. We've had break-ins." "We've had one break-in," I corrected. "Mine, which you didn't seem concerned about until I caught you on camera trying to enter my home yourself." "I would never," she started. "I'm not finished," I said firmly. "After the theft of my space heater, I walked through the neighborhood looking for it. I found it in Patricia's home office, visible through her window. I have photographs." I pulled up the photos on my phone and passed it around. Patricia stood up abruptly. "That's my property," she said quickly. "I bought that heater." "Really?" I said. "Because mine had a very distinctive scratch on the left side from when I accidentally scraped it against a door frame in November. The heater in your window has the exact same scratch in the exact same location." I showed the enhanced photo where the scratch was visible. Beth, the treasurer, was examining it closely, her expression grave. "Patricia, this looks really bad," Beth said quietly. "It's a coincidence," Patricia insisted. "Lots of heaters have scratches." "He's harassing me because I've been enforcing community standards that he doesn't want to follow." "What standards has he violated?" Ronald asked. Patricia fumbled with her papers. "Excessive energy consumption, improper trash can storage, unapproved patio furniture colors, none of which are actual violations according to our guidelines," I interrupted. I handed Ronald a copy of the community handbook with the relevant sections highlighted. "I've checked. There's no rule about energy consumption. The trash can rule only applies if they're left out for more than 24 hours after pickup, which mine weren't. And my patio furniture is color code beige 3, which is listed as approved on page 17. Ronald looked at the handbook, then at Patricia. "Is this true?" Patricia's mouth opened and closed. "The spirit of the rules, Patricia," Beth said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Did you steal this man's space heater?" "Of course not," Patricia said, but her voice was too loud, too defensive. "Then you won't mind if we take a look at your unit," Ronald said. "Right now." The room erupted in murmurs. Patricia looked trapped. "That's an invasion of privacy." "You can't, actually. As board members, we have the authority to inspect any unit if there's reasonable suspicion of activities that could create liability for the association," Beth said. She was clearly the most legally minded of the group. "This absolutely qualifies." "I'll call the police," I said, pulling out my phone. "They have the original theft report on file. If the heater in Patricia's unit has the serial number matching my purchase receipt, or if it has the distinctive scratch pattern documented in my photos, that's proof of theft." Patricia looked around wildly like she was searching for an escape route. Then her shoulders slumped. "Fine," she said quietly. "Fine. I took the stupid heater. Are you happy now?" The room exploded. Everyone was talking at once. Ronald was shouting for order. Beth looked like she was going to be sick. Several residents were recording on their phones. "Why would you do that?" Ronald demanded. Patricia's facade cracked completely. Tears started streaming down her face. Because my heater broke, and I didn't want to spend money on a new one when the electric bills are already so high. I saw his through the window when I was doing neighborhood checks, and the door was easy to open, and I thought he wouldn't miss it. He works from home, he's probably making good money doing his computer stuff, and he could just buy another one. I stared at her, genuinely shocked. So you decided to steal from me because you didn't want to buy your own heater. You're the HOA president. You drive a Mercedes. And you stole my $80 space heater. The Mercedes is leased, and I'm underwater on payments, Patricia said miserably. My husband left me 8 months ago, and he took half of everything. I'm drowning in debt. I wasn't thinking clearly. There was a long, awkward silence. Then Beth said, Patricia, I'm sorry for your personal situation, but you broke into a resident's home and committed theft. You've exposed the HOA to enormous legal liability. I'm calling for an emergency vote to remove you from the board effective immediately. Seconded, said one of the other board members instantly. The vote was unanimous, 4-0, with Patricia abstaining because she was too busy crying. Then Ronald turned to me. Mr. Forsyth, I am deeply sorry on behalf of the board, he said formally. We will issue a full written apology, refund any violation fines that were assessed, and waive your HOA fees for the next 6 months. We'll also replace your security equipment costs. I hope that begins to address this situation. I want my heater back, I said. And I want a formal admission of wrongdoing on record. Done, Beth said immediately. Patricia, you'll return Mr. Forsyth's property tonight, and we'll draft a formal statement for the record. I'm still calling the police, I said. I had already dialed the non-emergency number during the chaos. This isn't just an HOA matter. She committed burglary and theft. Patricia's head snapped up. Please, she said. Please don't. I'll lose my job if I have a criminal record. I made a mistake. I'll give you back the heater. I'll pay you back for any inconvenience. Just please don't press charges. I looked at her, this woman who had made my life miserable for weeks over an $80 appliance, and I felt a mix of anger and pity, but mostly anger. You violated my home, I said quietly. You stole my property. You harassed me with fake violations. You tried to break in again after I installed security, and based on what my neighbors have told me, you've been abusing your power and making people's lives difficult for years. This isn't just about the heater. Officer Ramirez arrived about 20 minutes later. By then, the board meeting had devolved into complete chaos, with residents demanding answers and board members trying to do damage control. Patricia sat in a chair looking defeated while I explained the situation to the officer. He reviewed all my evidence, including the photos and the security footage. Then he spoke with Patricia, who admitted to the theft. He placed her under arrest for burglary in the 3rd degree and theft, both felonies under Arizona law since she had broken into my home to commit the crime. Watching her being led out in handcuffs was surreal. Part of me felt guilty, like maybe I was overreacting. But then I remembered coming home to find my space missing, the violation of my privacy, the weeks of harassment. She had brought this on herself. I got my space heater back that night. Ronald and Beth accompanied the police to Patricia's unit, and they retrieved it. It was indeed mine, scratch and all. I took it home and plugged it in, and even though I had the replacement, having the original back felt like a small victory. Over the next few weeks, the story spread through Sunrise Valley estates like wildfire. It turned out I wasn't the only person Patricia had stolen from. 2 other residents came forward after hearing what had happened. One said she had been missing a pressure washer that she now suspected Patricia had taken. Another said several packages had disappeared from his doorstep, and he had always assumed they were stolen by random porch pirates, but now he wondered. The police investigated these claims, and it turned out Patricia had something of a hoarding problem. Her garage was full of items that didn't belong to her, things she had taken from neighbors over the past 2 years. Garden tools, decorative items, even a bicycle. She claimed she had been borrowing them or keeping them safe, but most of the owners had never given permission and didn't even know their items were missing. The additional thefts added to her charges. Her court date was set for February. The Homeowners Association hired a lawyer to distance themselves from her actions and issued a formal apology to all residents. Ronald took over as interim president, and he immediately started rolling back many of Patricia's more draconian rules. Emma and Daniel, my neighbors with the solar panels, became good friends. We started having dinner together once a week, and they introduced me to other residents who had been victims of Patricia's reign. There was talk of forming a new board with more reasonable people, of rewriting the community guidelines to prevent future abuse. The energy bill angle that had first tipped me off turned out to be accurate. George, the guy who worked for the power company, mentioned to me later that Patricia's account had indeed been flagged for unusual usage in December. She had received an automated notice about her consumption spike, which was what prompted her to send me that fake violation notice about excessive energy use. She had been projecting her own guilt onto me, trying to establish a paper trail that would make her look concerned about energy consumption if anyone questioned why her own bills were suddenly higher. It was such a stupid, short-sighted plan that it was almost impressive in its incompetence. She had stolen an $80 heater to save money, ended up with felony charges, lost her position on the HOA board, and faced thousands in legal fees. All because she didn't want to buy her own heater. The preliminary hearing was in January. I had to testify about the theft and the break-in. Patricia showed up with a public defender, looking much smaller and more vulnerable than she ever had while prowling the neighborhood with her clipboard. She pleaded guilty as part of a plea deal that would give her probation instead of prison time, provided she paid restitution to all the victims and completed community service. The judge was not sympathetic. "Mrs. Hendricks," he said sternly, "you were in a position of trust within your community. You were supposed to be protecting the interests of your neighbors, not victimizing them. The fact that you were going through personal difficulties does not excuse breaking into someone's home and stealing their property." She was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution totaling over $3,000 to me and the other victims. She also had to undergo counseling for what her lawyer described as kleptomania triggered by financial stress. I received a check for $400 from Patricia, $200 for the heater itself, and $200 for my time, distress, and replacement security equipment. It wasn't much, but it felt like justice. More importantly, I got a handwritten apology letter that her probation officer required her to write. It was surprisingly sincere. "Dear Mr. Forsyth," it read, "I am deeply sorry for violating your privacy and stealing your property. There is no excuse for my behavior. I was dealing with personal and financial problems, but that does not justify what I did to you and others in our community. I betrayed the trust that comes with being HOA president. I hope that someday you can forgive me, though I understand if you cannot. I am working to become a better person and make amends for my actions. Sincerely, Patricia Hendricks." I didn't frame the letter or anything dramatic like that, but I did keep it, not out of vindictiveness, but as a reminder that people are complicated. Patricia had been awful to me, but she was also clearly struggling with issues I knew nothing about. Her behavior was inexcusable, but I could at least understand that she was a human being who had made terrible choices rather than some one-dimensional villain. Life in Sunrise Valley Estates improved dramatically after Patricia was removed from power. Ronald turned out to be a much more reasonable HOA president. He implemented new policies requiring board approval for any fines over $25 and established a dispute resolution process so residents could challenge violations before being fined. He also organized quarterly community meetings where people could voice concerns in a less formal setting than the official board meetings. The neighborhood started to feel more like an actual community rather than a police state. People were friendlier, more willing to introduce themselves and chat. Block parties were organized. The pool area, which had always been full of rules about noise and guest limits, became more relaxed and welcoming. I even started dating someone I met at one of the community events, a woman named Sarah who lived 2 buildings over. She had her own Patricia horror story about being fined for having a wreath on her door past December 26th. We bonded over our shared experiences and discovered we had a lot in common beyond our hatred of HOA tyranny. My space heater, the one that started everything, continued to work perfectly through the rest of that winter. Every time I turned it on, I thought about the absurd chain of events it had triggered. An $80 appliance had brought down an HOA president, exposed a pattern of theft and abuse, and ultimately made my living situation much better. I also became much more security conscious. I kept the camera system active and added cameras covering the front door and the parking area. I invested in better locks for all my doors and windows. The peace of mind was worth the expense. I never wanted to experience that violated feeling of coming home to discover someone had been in my private space ever again. George, the electrical company employee who had given me the tip about usage spikes, became a good friend. We played basketball together at the community court on Sunday mornings, and he introduced me to his wife and kids. It turned out he had been wanting to stand up to Patricia for years, but had never quite worked up the courage. He thanked me multiple times for being the one to finally take her down. In March, 3 months after the initial theft, I was working in my home office on a particularly cold morning. The space heater hummed next to my desk, keeping the room comfortable while I typed away at code for a client project. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah asking if I wanted to grab dinner that evening. Through my window, I could see kids playing in the common area without being yelled at for making too much noise. It occurred to me that the whole nightmare with Patricia, as stressful and violating as it had been, had actually led to positive changes in my life. I was more connected to my community. I had made real friends instead of being a hermit who only left his townhome for work and errands. I was dating someone wonderful. I had learned to stand up for myself instead of just accepting injustice. Sometimes bad things happen for reasons we can't understand in the moment. The theft of my space heater had felt like a random, cruel violation. But it had exposed serious problems in our HOA and led to improvements that benefited everyone. It had forced me out of my comfort zone and into engagement with the world around me. I'm not saying I'm grateful Patricia broke into my home and stole my property. That would be ridiculous. But I am grateful for how I responded to it, for finding the courage to fight back, to document everything, to stand up in that board meeting and demand justice. I'm grateful for the community that rallied around me and shared their own stories. I'm grateful that the system, imperfect as it is, ultimately worked. Patricia had sent me so many violation notices during her harassment campaign. Looking back, the irony was incredible. She had been violating the law, violating community trust, violating basic human decency. And in the end, she was the one who faced consequences. The electric bill that had started the whole unraveling, showing her usage spike from stealing and using my heater, was still the detail that made me smile. She had literally been caught by data, by the automatic systems that flag unusual patterns. All her attempts to harass me with fake violations couldn't hide the fact that her own electrical consumption told the truth. In April, the HOA held elections for new board positions. Emma and Daniel, my neighbors with the solar panels, both ran and won seats. They immediately started working on updating the community guidelines to be more reasonable and establishing better oversight, so no single board member could wield the kind of unchecked power Patricia had abused. I was asked to run for a position too, but I declined. I had no interest in HOA politics. I just wanted to live my life, do my work, and enjoy my home without drama. But I did promise to stay engaged and attend meetings when important issues came up. Once you've seen how bad things can get when residents are apathetic, you can't go back to complete disengagement. Sarah and I got serious pretty quickly. By summer, we were talking about moving in together, maybe finding a place outside of Sunrise Valley Estates altogether. We loved the community and the friends we had made, but the townhome wasn't quite big enough for two people who both worked from home. We started looking at houses in the Phoenix area, places without HOAs where we could paint our walls whatever color we wanted and leave our trash cans out all day if we felt like it. In June, I ran into Patricia at a grocery store. It was awkward and unexpected. She was in the produce section, looking tired and worn in a way she never had when she was HOA president. She saw me at the same moment I saw her, and we both froze. For a few seconds, I thought about just turning around and leaving, but something made me walk over. "Hi," I said simply. "Hi," she replied, her voice small. "How are you?" "Good, you," she shrugged. "I'm managing, working retail now, doing my community service at a food bank on weekends." She paused. "I'm really sorry, for everything." "I got your letter," I said. "I appreciate the apology." "I was a mess," Patricia said quietly. "The divorce, the money problems, I just spiraled. That's not an excuse, I know, but I'm in therapy now, trying to figure out why I became such a controlling nightmare." I didn't know what to say to that. "I hope it helps." "Me too." She looked at me with genuine regret in her eyes. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you fought back. Everyone else just took my garbage behavior, which probably made it worse. You were the first person to stand up to me, and even though it cost me everything, I needed that wake-up call." It was probably the most self-aware thing I had ever heard her say. "Well, good luck with everything," I said, and I meant it. "You too," she said, and then we went our separate ways down different aisles. I thought about that encounter for days afterward. Patricia had been a tyrant, a thief, and a bully. But she was also a human being who had been struggling and made terrible choices. The justice system had held her accountable. She was paying her debt to society. At some point, you have to let go of anger and move on with your life. That's what I was doing. Moving on. Building a life that was better than before, surrounded by people I cared about, in a community that had learned and grown from its mistakes. My little space heater, sitting in my office, had been the catalyst for all of it. Sarah and I found a house we loved in Tempe in August. 3 bedrooms, a real yard, and no HOA. We put in an offer and it was accepted. As we prepared to move, I felt a weird nostalgia for Sunrise Valley Estates, despite everything that had happened. It had been the site of one of the most stressful experiences of my life, but also where I had learned to fight for myself, and where I had met Sarah. On my last day in the townhome, I packed up my space heater carefully, wrapping it in bubble wrap like it was a precious artifact. In a way, it was. This ridiculous little appliance had changed my life in ways I never could have predicted. Emma and Daniel threw us a going-away party at the clubhouse. Most of our friends from the neighborhood came, bringing food and drinks and good wishes. George gave a toast about how I had single-handedly reformed the HOA by refusing to let Patricia get away with her behavior. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. Ronald, still serving as HOA president, pulled me aside before the party ended. "I know you're glad to be leaving," he said. "And I don't blame you after what you went through, but I want you to know that what you did mattered. This place is so much better because you stood up to Patricia. A lot of people would have just moved out quietly or accepted the harassment. You fought back, and it made a real difference." "Thanks," I said, genuinely touched. "Just take care of this place. Don't let anyone abuse their power like that again." "We won't," he promised. "We've got real oversight now, real accountability. The board actually serves the community instead of ruling over it." Sarah and I moved into our new house the following weekend. It was smaller than I expected, but it was ours. No HOA board to answer to, no ridiculous rules about doormat colors or trash timing. Just a normal house in a normal neighborhood where people mostly minded their own business in the best possible way. I set up my home office in the spare bedroom. The space heater went in its usual spot next to my desk. As I plugged it in for the first time in the new house, I thought about everything that had happened since that cold December morning when I discovered it missing. A theft had led to an investigation, which had led to exposing corruption, which had led to reform, which had led to friendships and community and ultimately to love. The butterfly effect in action, starting with an $80 space heater. Winter came around again. Phoenix doesn't get that cold, but there were still mornings when the temperature dropped enough that I appreciated having the heater. Every time I turned it on, I remembered. Not just the bad parts, the violation and anger and stress, but also the good parts. The way neighbors had rallied around me. The satisfaction of seeing justice served. The growth I had experienced in learning to advocate for myself. Sarah would sometimes joke about the heater, calling it our origin story appliance. We would laugh about the absurdity of it all, how a petty theft by an HOA president had led to us meeting and falling in love. Life is strange that way, full of unexpected connections and consequences. I heard through the grapevine that Patricia completed her probation and community service. She apparently moved to Flagstaff for a fresh start, working as a medical receptionist and living a much quieter life. I genuinely hoped she found peace and that her therapy helped her work through whatever issues had led to her behavior. Holding on to resentment would only poison my own life. The lesson I took from the whole experience wasn't about HOAs or space heaters, or even standing up to bullies, though all of those were part of it. The real lesson was about paying attention to injustice and being willing to do something about it, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. So many people knew Patricia was abusing her power, but everyone just accepted it as the price of living in an HOA community. It took one person refusing to accept that injustice to spark change. That person happened to be me, but it could have been anyone. Sometimes all it takes is one voice saying, "This isn't right," to start a cascade of revelations and reforms. In the end, my stolen space heater became a symbol of something much larger than itself. It represented the dangers of unchecked power, the importance of accountability, and the potential for ordinary people to make a difference when they refuse to be victims. Not bad for a simple ceramic heating device that cost $80 at the hardware store. I still live in that house in Temp. Sarah and I got married last year. The space heater still works perfectly, humming away on cold mornings while I write code and she grades papers at her own desk across the room. Sometimes we look at each other and laugh, remembering how we met because of an HOA dispute over stolen property. Life has a sense of humor, and sometimes the worst experiences lead to the best outcomes. I wouldn't choose to go through that whole nightmare again, but I also wouldn't trade where it led me. My home is warm, my life is full, and justice was served to a petty tyrant who thought she could steal with impunity. And somewhere in a storage unit, I still have that folder full of documentation from the case. Police reports, security footage, violation notices, neighbor statements, and photos of a scratched space heater sitting in a window where it didn't belong. Evidence of the time I took down an HOA president over an appliance, proved by the spike in her electrical bill that she couldn't explain away. Sometimes the simplest things lead to the most complicated situations, and sometimes standing up for yourself over something small sends ripples that change everything. That's what happened when Patricia Hendricks stole my space heater and got caught when her electric bill showed the usage spike. She thought she was getting away with petty theft. Instead, she started a chain of events that would cost her everything and teach a community that accountability matters, no matter who thinks they're in charge.